You're watching Sky News. The headlines this afternoon. EU leaders held a Brexit breakfast without the UK amid a fresh warning about the huge and serious gap between the two sides.
The Prime Minister leaves the summit early, telling EU leaders that lives are at risk if they fail to reach a deal with the UK.
But there is progress on the migration crisis. After an all-night session, EU leaders plan to set up closed migrant centres.
Also ahead, the inquiry into the Grenfell Tower disaster. Here's how water bounced off cladding panels, making it impossible to douse the fire.
A judge rules Hillsborough match commander David Duckenfield can face trial for the manslaughter by gross negligence of 95 football supporters.
Dozens of firefighters are battling a fire at a flat in East London. We'll have the very latest.
And in sport, England lose to Belgium, but may have won an easier route through the World Cup. Very good afternoon. There's been a fresh warning today from the European Union that Britain is running out of time to get a deal on Brexit, as leaders agreed to step up preparations for the possibility that talks could collapse. The 27 leaders have been meeting without Prime Minister Theresa May on the second day of a summit in Brussels.
They have made some progress, though, on a compromise deal on the migrant crisis after an all-night marathon of talks. We'll have the very latest developments from Brussels in a few moments' time. But first of all, our senior political correspondent, Jason Farrell, sent this report.
It's the morning after the night before.
That's Jean-Claude Juncker there, summing up the EU summit meeting in Brussels.
Well, let's go now to another press conference, and that's in Saddleworth Moor, where, of course, those fires have been raging since Sunday, and hundreds of fire crews have been there trying to deal with the situation. We also know a couple of other fires have broken out, but let's listen into what they've had to say there.
Obviously, this is an ongoing situation.
Well, there we go. That was the press conference on Saddleworth Moor there. The fire service saying it could take many days, even weeks, in order for that fire to die down. They say they're hoping for a downpour because obviously this weather at the moment doesn't help. And the Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, confirming that they have requested a government extension for military support there for around 3 days, because obviously they need a lot of resources. Him saying that, you know, it's the busiest day for that fire service in living memory.
Want to update you on a fire we told you about in the last hour or so in Mile End in East London. We're hearing from the London Fire Brigade that fire, which was in a flat on the 12th floor of a tower block, is now under control. There were 8 fire engines, 58 firefighters who were in attendance there, but the Fire Brigade saying it is now under control. We've had some picture coming in. This was earlier on. This isn't the most up-to-date picture after they said they've got it under control, but the Fire Brigade on top of things there.
The match commander on the day of the Hillsborough disaster, David Duckenfield, can face trial for the manslaughter by gross negligence of 95 football supporters. The Sky reporter Fraser Maud is at Preston Crown Court. Fraser, where do things go from here?
Well, this ruling today involved 6 people who are potentially facing prosecution. Will definitely now face charges, 95 charges of gross negligence manslaughter. OK,
Fraser, thank you.
Stay with us. Coming up next here, it's the sport.
There's news of a contract extension for one of Manchester United's midfielders, and the draw for Wimbledon has been made, and there's a tricky first-round match for Andy Murray.
Welcome back. Let's get a check now on all the day's sports.
Easy, Joe. What are you throwing things at him for?
This programme is brought to you by Vitality Health and Life Insurance.
Have it.
Getting active brings its own rewards.
Good afternoon. Tuesday's World Cup last 16 tie against Colombia will be England's biggest game for a decade. And there's more live now on Sky Sports News. We're back at 3:20.
Will you keep the noise down? I'm trying to relax here. Heather!
Quick check on the weather now.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, an EU deal on migration is pushed through by Italy's Prime Minister. We'll have reaction to all the latest developments in Brussels. Welcome back. Let's return now to Brushes Reservoir, and we've had an update on the moorland fire there a little earlier on in the programme. Well, let's speak now to the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Very good afternoon to you. We can see in the background there some of the smoke still billowing out. What's the situation like on the ground?
Oh, it's still a very difficult situation, as you can see. Lots of people out there working hard in very difficult conditions. So the fire is contained, but it's still raging. As you occasionally can see, it will jump up behind us every now and again. So still a very challenging situation, but we're extremely grateful to our own fire and rescue service here in Greater Manchester, the others around that have come to our aid, but of course the military who've been here since yesterday morning and have really helped us get the numbers of people out there to try and get this thing under control.
And what kind of impact has it had on people living nearby and indeed in these other two locations where there are now smaller fires that have outbroken?
The biggest impact is on air quality. So when I was here on Wednesday, and I only spent a couple of hours here, I went away and for the rest of the day I could feel it in my throat. You know, so for people here who've been had prolonged exposure to this smoky air, then there is a real impact on their health, and it's why we're saying they do need to follow the advice from Public Health England and the local council to stay indoors as much as possible with windows and doors shut. It's still a difficult environment, and you know, the concern is as it goes on, and it will go on for days if not weeks, people really do need to limit their exposure to this smoky air.
We're looking at some of the pictures on the screen at the moment. I mean, we're hearing that industrial pollution from the peat could also be a problem. How concerned are they about that?
Yes, we've got air quality monitoring equipment around the local area, so we'll always be making sure that if there was any contaminants in the air that we would pick that up. You know, there's lots of issues that the team here on the ground, the fire service with the military are monitoring, and that's the potential spread of the fire into areas where it hasn't been. So all of that is being monitored on an ongoing basis, to the point that we've made a request today as Greater Manchester to the government for an extension of the support from the military. So we've asked for a further 3 days assistance, and we hope that can be agreed, because though the situation is under control with regard to the spread of the fire, obviously the fire clearly isn't out, and we do need to carry on working to get it right down.
And how long do you think that's going to take? I mean, are we talking days, weeks?
See, the tempting thing for me would be to say, oh, we'll have it done in a couple of days, but that isn't probably the wise thing to do, because we're in a very unpredictable situation. You know, the weather couldn't be worse, if you like, in that it's hot and it's gusty, but also the nature of a moorland fire, of a peat fire, is that it can be underground and it can look okay, then a minute later it pops up. So it's an unpredictable situation. All I can say is our own fire and rescue service will be here as long as it takes, and that could be days, but possibly weeks. And it's probably not wise at this moment in time to put a firm prediction on it.
And how significant is this? Because I was listening in your press conference earlier, and you said for the fire service, local fire service, it must be the busiest time that they've had in living history.
Yes, talking to firefighters this week, that's absolutely what they say. This has been an extraordinarily difficult week for Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. Not just what's been happening here and all the many firefighters and pumps that have been committed here. There's also been a fire in the city centre, a large fire in Rochdale, and of course in the last 24 hours the fire at Winter Hill, where we have been supporting Lancashire Fire and Rescue, where they've been taking the lead. So this has been an incredibly difficult week for everybody in Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service, but they've really stepped forward and really reassured the communities here. They've worked flat out in the most difficult conditions for a firefighter, with the heavy equipment on in this heat, trying to beat the fire back. You know, that is tough work, and we all owe them a big debt of thanks.
OK, Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, thanks ever so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Now, it was a disappointing night on the pitch for England as they suffered their first defeat at the World Cup at the hands of Belgium. Both teams had already qualified for the last 16 and fielded substantially weakened teams. So what did the fans, who spent thousands of pounds heading out there to watch the games, make of it? Well, let's find out now from our correspondent, Diana Magnate, who's there for us. Diana Magnate, rather strange evening last night, because, of course, some fans were actually celebrating the fact that they lost, because this now means England won't face Brazil.
Exactly. That eventuality that England could have faced Brazil in the quarter-finals is now out. We'll play. A lot hangs on that match on Tuesday in Moscow. Colombia versus England. Hopefully they'll pull that through, and then we're really steaming ahead.
OK, Diana, thank you.
Stay with us. Coming up next here on Sky News, there's a CO2 shortage at the moment, but what's behind it?
Welcome back. Now, production in the UK is feeling a little flat as the CO2 shortage continues to create headaches. The latest victim is the humble crumpet, with Warburton's producing nowhere near its usual amount of the British staple. Well, joining us now is Anthony Brown, who's a supply chain researcher at the University of Leeds. Very good afternoon to you. What is causing this issue with the CO2 reduction?
Good afternoon, Rebecca. Thank you for having me. Yeah, well, the shortage of the supply of CO2 comes from the fact that some of the plants that produce it, and is usually a byproduct of something else that is ammonia, are shutting down for the summer. They're doing the usual cleanup that a lot of factories do. And because of that, not all of them are online and producing the CO2 that the end consumer, that the end producers in soft drink, foods and other industries need to continue their production.
And we mentioned the good old humble crumpet there, but what other kind of foods are likely to be affected?
Well, things like it's used in poultry in terms of when they're going to process the chickens, etc. But it's used a lot in soft drinks and in beer. As a matter of fact, it's a crucial component of getting those two products out the door. Every time you open a bottle of soft drinks, of Coke, of Pepsi, or anything like that, you'll hear this whooshing sound. That's the CO2 coming in, and those bubbles that you get when you're drinking, that's CO2.
So what kind of impact is this likely to have on businesses? I mean, could some go out of business?
Well, possibly, of course, because the problem is that if it's a key component of getting the product to have the right taste and the right feel, consumers are going to be put off if they're not getting that. At the same time, it's better to shut down than to put out a product that is